Okay. Well, we don't have any intro or anything like that today, simply because the fact that my producer is not available. So this is going to be kind of a bare bones session. I'm joining a couple of minutes early um, just to get things going. Hi, Tony. Hi, Jody. Good to see you. Thanks for joining. We're going to hold on. If you have anything you want to talk about before we get started, but officially I won't be getting started for 3 more minutes as well at the moment. So feel free to pop in something if you want to. In the meantime, hopefully you can hear me well. If you cannot, please let me know. Hi, Paul. All right. So, like I said, I'm hoping everybody can hear me. There's somebody. Here we are. Yeah, I did start early, Lucas. Only, and I'm not really starting yet, but we can start if people have something. I'm starting early because my producer's not available today, so I don't have the fancy intro. And thank you for letting me know you can hear me okay. That's good. All right. Yeah, I should really figure out how to do this myself to add, because I'm not using the same platform he is. But I should probably have added some music in, I guess. I do have some stuff I could always play. All right, well, we can get started. It's 2 minutes early, but that's perfectly okay. So welcome to another episode of Ask Professor Paranormal. This month, it's tonight, April 13th, and then it'll be April 27th. And I'll only be doing one session in May. I'll have to look up the exact date. But the reason being that otherwise I'll be doing one Memorial Day weekend and would then have to skip one in June because of travel plans. So I'll talk about that next time as well. All right, we're still a little bit early before I really jump into this, but did any of you folks, Paul, especially you, did you happen to join that discussion of survival that was available pretty much out there on the web? It's going to be actually up there pretty soon. Did you know about it? Did you hear about it? But it was run by the Perry Center today. And actually, they recorded it and they'll be putting it on their YouTube channel. So it was something that was pretty interesting. I'll talk about a few things related to that in a little bit. Since near-death experiences were a good part of it, Paul, I just thought I'd ask, since that seems to be an interest of yours. All right. Well, we're just about at 5:30 Pacific time. As soon as the recording is made available, I will be putting a link on my website to it as a resource. I'm sure it's going to be showing up in a lot of places, but it's a really interesting session that was done today because there were, I think 9 researchers who each presented about 15 minutes. And then there's another 11 that will be presenting their videos that were done in advance that were not shown to us today will be added to the recording. So this is from the Perry Center, PARI, and it was focused on the question of life after death, survival of bodily death. Part of it was about evidence. Part of it was about some other stuff too. So welcome, Susanna. All right. Jody, yeah, I know how you feel, Jody. I had a little bit of a brain fry the last few weeks too. In fact, I'm behind on grading for my Rhine classes, and this is even before we're starting the new ones because they're already posted. I'll talk about those in a moment. But sometimes the physical environment kind of gets in the way. We had work on our house at the same time that we had our utilities company, and they still have work to do, digging up the street on and off, using dredging, all sorts of weird noise-making equipment, and it's been really not fun. Let's put it that way. Made it really hard for me to concentrate. I was lucky enough to be able to teach my classes in the evening. Anyway, what I was alluding to earlier, and what I'm going to do is going to pull up some information for myself just so I can kind of refer to it. Before or while I'm doing that, I will mention that the audiobook of a paranormal casebook is now available. It is part of the Audible system, but you can also download it by itself. I think it's $9.99 for that. The audiobook was not read by me. I will tell you that right off the bat. In fact, it'll tell you that it's a virtual voice. So I chose a voice out of the something like 60 voices Amazon was providing, and played around a little bit with the speed based on what people were asking, and love some feedback if anybody actually listens to it. It's not perfect. I know that those virtual voices, the one place that they run into issues is when they're reading a URL for a website that is within the text. That's where it gets weird. But otherwise, it sounds pretty good. I've been listening to it. It does sound pretty good. So that is available these days now. So that is available right now. The just simply was an online, what was available today was an online event by the Parry Center. There were a total of, like I said, 20 speakers, although we only heard 9 today. And many of the names might not be familiar to you, but Gary Schwartz was one of them. We had some Bernard Carr, who is a kind of in the consciousness and physics space, talked as well today. Some of the better known names like Stan Krippner, Helena Wabe, Jeffrey Long, Stephen Schwartz, Eben Alexander, Jeffrey Mishlove, Bruce Grayson, all of those folks contributed videos, which we did not see today. They will be incorporated in the launch of the video of the live talks, the recordings of the live talks today. And that should be coming up very soon. As I mentioned, I'm going to put the link on my website, lloydauerbach.com. I'll put it on social media for sure, and make sure that we also mention it next week, or include that next time, rather, in 2 weeks. Really interesting, because it was not merely about evidence for survival of bodily death. It was really looking at the question and some implications, and even how to deal with people who kind of hit you with the yeah, there's no evidence for that kind of thing. So some really, really worthwhile. All right, Paul, have you seen the podcast called The Magic Skeptic? Have not. Yeah, do send me a link. He talks about actor John Cleese. Well, I mean, John Cleese actually has been involved with the folks at DOPS at the University of Virginia. He did a great session that is on YouTube, which is a discussion with everyone from DOPS. And then he did some individual videos also on YouTube. I think that if you put in John Cleese and either life after death or survival into the YouTube search engine, you'll find that. Really, really good. I mean, John Cleese is very serious about consciousness research. He's done work at Esalen as well. And even though he is an actor and comedian, you know, actors and comedians have real interests, and he absolutely has an interest here. And he is a brilliant guy. It's one of the best presentations I've ever seen with parapsychologists or people doing research in the subject, because he knows the questions to ask, which is really good. So I don't know what the Magic Skeptic said, but if he's making fun of that just because John Cleese did it, he's an idiot. That's all I can say. If he's not making fun of them, if he's talking in a positive way, or at least in a neutral way, that's one thing. But, you know, that's not a problem. Okay, as always, I often talk about the classes that are actually coming up for the Ryan Research Center. And the classes are posted on ryanedu.org at this point. So you can join them, or, you know, register for them. I'll mention they're starting, one of my classes is starting on, I'm trying to remember, on May 1st. So that's a 4-week class that I have called Developing Investigative Techniques, which really looks at how the methods for investigating things like people's experiences of ESP and PK, but more importantly for many people, apparitions, hauntings, and poltergeists, reincarnation, and some other near-death experience, how all of that has evolved historically to the present day. So that's starting May 1st. There are other courses. I have another course that is starting May 6th. In fact, most of the other courses for the Ryan Education Center are starting May 6th, or excuse me, May 5th, the week of May 5th. One of them is my class, which is May 6th, which is, Tina, I did see you there on the participant list. So my class, the other class I'm teaching is an 8-week class called The Science of ESP, looking at research and findings around extrasensory perception. So really kind of focused on telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, remote viewing, all of those things as well. And then there's a course, if you haven't taken the Introduction to Parapsychology course, it is now being taught by Jimmy Akin, who does a great podcast called Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. And that course is starting on Monday the 5th. That's also an 8-week class. There is also a course on remote viewing by Paul Smith, who is part of our board of directors. So you want to learn something about remote viewing? That's a place to go. And then there is finally a course called Psi Themes in Music. And it really explores, it's by Matt Marble. He's exploring how musicians and composers have kind of pulled in inspiration from their intuition, from the creative side and the psychic states that are facilitated in there. So it should be really interesting looking at altered states and symbolism and synchronicity, you know, dreams, divination, sacred geometry, all that stuff. Sounds like a really fascinating course. It's 4 weeks, starting Wednesday, May 7th, I think it is. I'll probably take that course myself or sit in on it as well. This sounds like a great course. Okay. Do spirits influence autocorrect possession? The answer to that, Jody, is if they did, we wouldn't have as many problems with autocorrect, unless, of course, they didn't like us. Tina, you know, I would love to voice my audiobooks. I don't have time or resources, frankly, to do the editing myself or to pay someone else to do the editing. It's not actually reading the book that takes the most time. It's the editing that takes the most time. Because if you stumble over your words, you don't want that to be in the audiobook. You know, if you have a long pause in the middle of a sentence or a paragraph, you don't want that to be in the audiobook. You have to actually have editing done. And that's the main reason that I'm not doing that. I just don't have the time for that. So it's a shame. I would really have liked to, and maybe one day, maybe when I'm retired, I'll go back in and do them as well. From Lucas, to what extent are the colleagues in your normal life, such as LexisNexis, aware of your double life as a prominent parapsychologist that ever led to any amusing interactions? Okay, that's a great question. So let's start at the beginning. I'll tell you what's going on now, but the beginning. Back in 1984, I was getting so much publicity because of Ghostbusters. For a number of reasons, the Oakland Tribune did a feature article on me, like a page and a half, was front page of the living section, the second section of the paper, big photo of me, and then it continued on the next page. It was about the graduate parapsychology program, but because of timing, I was the only one in town. So that article, which ran at the beginning of September 1984, was picked up by the Associated Press. And over the next couple of months, because it was not a timely, you know, it wasn't specific to September, it was actually more timely in October because of Halloween. It ran in over 500 newspapers. The faculty of the graduate parapsychology program did well over, I believe it was over 400 radio interviews, anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour, 2 hours. I did over 250 of them between September and October. So there's all this stuff going on. I was asked by my publisher to do some appearances, and, you know, what could I set up? My editor kind of talked to me about that. So because of my family television connections, I knew quite a bit about how to get out to the media otherwise. And I planned a trip to New York around Halloween. And through my dad's connections, he used to work at NBC, and he knew people at Today Show. and he pitched me to the Today Show, and they contacted me, and I ended up doing the Today Show. So I'm going to go on the Today Show and other shows that Halloween. And my manager at Lexus, um, we talked about this. So people in my office knew all about this. I mean, the folks I was working with, everybody in the office knew. Because I was getting local publicity, pretty much everybody, or I should say many of the customers knew as well. And had a lot of the librarians were very interested at that point. So my manager says we should call the head of marketing. At that point, the company was called Media Data Central, and ask them what you can say if somebody asks you where you work. Okay, so we call the head of marketing. There's silence after explain who I am, what's going on and what's happening with the Today Show, and then the response is, Lloyd, can you wear a Lexus tie on the show? Can you talk as much as just name drop us as much? So the company was fine with this. The company president, Jack Simpson, I knew him a bit. He knew about it. Hunter Grant, who was a VP, actually ended up doing investigations at some point. I could not wear a Lexus tie on TV because NBC wouldn't let me, which is too bad. Would have been product placement. But there was an internal newsletter for Media Data Central, and at one point they wrote an article. They were actually doing articles in the newsletter about some of the employees and if they had an interesting side gig or hobby. And one of the people in my office actually was also an aerobics instructor. So she had an article called Ready Exercise. And then the follow-up was me, and the headline was Ready X or Size. So that was kind of fun. Today, because so many people are still around, when I rejoined Lexus, I was away from Lexus for 10 years. When I rejoined in 2017, there were still a bunch of the librarians and other folks who had known me for years, and actually was still in contact with some of them. And I work these days specifically with law librarians at larger law firms, kind of the major law firms here that are headquartered in the West Coast, Western states, but a lot of the ones on the East do as well. So I have been asked by one firm in particular for the last several years during October to do a ghost story session for the entire library staff. I have done one for the Northern California Association of Law Libraries. I have done some short things for other chapters of the American Association for Law Libraries. I have done stuff internally as well, here and there. So people do know about it. There's always changing of the guard at the top, but most of the folks who have been around for the last few years, when we have sometimes meetings, company meetings, smaller meetings, I've been asked what my latest case was. So they're all perfectly cool with it, which is great. Not a problem. So, it's that double life, but I think there's probably more people on the parapsychological, paranormal side that don't know anything about my day job than there are the other way around. All right, Desideratum, yes, the courses for the Rhine Education Center, they are all online. And the way they work very simply is there's a weekly live lecture, usually in the evenings, and evening like 5 o'clock Pacific time, 8 o'clock Eastern time. That's when I do them. There's a couple of the other courses that may be earlier in the day. They are all recorded. They're typically up online by the next day or the end of the next day. And so I'd say that no more than 50% of my students in a given class attend live. And it's often less than that, which means that they're the only ones really taking advantage of a live discussion session, which is too bad. But students can always post questions that I respond to or the instructors respond to. And then there are discussion forums. If you're going for a grade, you participate in the discussion forums. You reply to other students and all that. If you're not going for a grade, which is probably about 30 to 40% of the students generally, you just want to take it for fun, that's fine. You can participate as much or as little as you want. And the grades, the grading is towards certificate programs we actually have. If I just finished the field investigations course, the base course, and depending on how people do, they end up with a certificate from me, bringing them into the Office of Paranormal Investigation Network. Then there is actually 2 certificate programs for investigators, and there's one for researchers. There's a liberal studies one. There's a whole bunch there. So they are online. We are very approachable. And I think one of the best things is the Ryan Center does not cut off your access. Pretty much, I don't know that we cut off anybody's access to the course they took for years, something like that. So you can always go back and watch the lectures as well. Jody just saw video citing CERN experiments citing all energy must be physically contained to continue to exist, as in the body is gone, as proof of non-survival of consciousness. I do not agree about that at all. Sorry, but there's, if you want to talk about it must be contained by the world or by physics or by the universe. Yes, I'd say that is true. But if it must be contained in a system, like what they're talking about there, I think, is that the energy of thought, the electrochemical energy in our brain, would have to be transformed into a different form of energy in order to survive consciousness, to survive the death of the body, if the brain is what's generating or producing consciousness. However, as they discuss quite a bit today, the brain may not be necessarily generating consciousness in that sense. In fact, one of the ways to look at it is that the brain is not a productive organ. It's not producing consciousness, but it's allowing consciousness to happen. Even if it produced consciousness to start with, it's still permissive in that sense. So and then that's assuming that consciousness is energy. Consciousness could be a quantum particle field. Consciousness could be something else altogether. Or consciousness could be a different form of energy that has not been discovered by physics as yet. So to say that as definitive, it's not proof. Science, you don't have proof. It may be a theoretical model of the non-existence of consciousness after death, but that's all it is a model. Okay. Is there a cost difference for courses if you're not interested? Yeah, they're pretty much the same price for auditing or taking them for a grade. They're relatively low cost. So and the Ryan Center could always work out if you have a payment issue you want to work out. Typically, the Ryan Center will work that out with you. But they are relatively low cost. And if you join the Ryan Center as a member, you also get a discount on courses. But the problem is that we end up with students sometimes who decide after taking the first couple of weeks that they want to go for a grade. And that would completely be a problem if we're charging a different rate. And then we sometimes have students who are deciding to go audit in the middle of the course. And we can't do refunds on that. So it's really just one price. But they are, again, low enough cost. We are, Jody, the whole idea of materialism is starting as a philosophy, which is starting to erode quite a bit. Not with everybody, but it is really trying to be eroded. We're kind of in a post-materialist journey right now. I think that's probably the best way to say it. Okay, Paul, you saw an interview with Diane Hennessy Powell about the telepathy tape. Her partner, Kai Dickens, said telepathy is real, and she believes in survival. We have a lot of evidence. I always love to hear, and this was addressed by one of the speakers, Jeffrey Dunn, talked about this. People will say things like, there is no evidence. Now, you could say there is no good evidence or convincing evidence, but to say that there is no evidence indicates incredible ignorance. And I've had people say that to me, the disbelievers. There's no evidence of survival of death, of life after death. It's like, again, I'll say to them, so you're unaware that there is any evidence? And they will say yes. They said, okay, so have you looked at, and I'll start talking about the SPR's work, the journals that have been out, the studies that have been done outside the field. Are you aware of those studies? And if they say yes, I said, then you can't say there's no evidence. Have you read those studies? You can't say that there's no good evidence because you have not read them and determined whether they're good or bad. So, it's like when you say that there's no evidence of something, if you have not looked or been informed that there is or is not evidence, I mean, there may be, I will tell you right now, one of the common explanations, if you want to call it that, for situations where multiple people see the same apparition, whether it's at the same time or over time, is mass hallucination. There is a little evidence, but incredibly little evidence for mass hallucination. It is not good evidence, and it has not been applied to apparitional sightings or hauntings for that matter. So when people say mass hallucination, I said, where is the evidence that supports that mass hallucination, number one, exists? There's a little bit there, but it's not clearly not a lot of evidence and not convincing evidence. And number two, there's no evidence that I've seen that applies mass hallucination and an understanding of what mass hallucination is to an apparition. Because you can say that there's evidence because people say that there is, but that's not evidence. That's an opinion in many respects. There's a lot of criticism of the telepathy tapes and issues with Diane Hennessy Powell's studies. I think it's worth looking at the criticisms, but also looking at the responses to the criticisms as well. It's sometimes a matter of approach, and it's often really interesting what the criticisms actually are of any of this. Beyond there is no evidence. Sometimes I can kind of really, I don't support this, but I can understand when somebody says, my religion will not let me believe in this. I understand that. They have faith, they have religious beliefs. That's fine. I also understand on the other side that a true materialist can't look at the evidence that is there and come to any conclusion other than the evidence. There's something wrong with the evidence, because they have blinders or blocks, a bias because of their belief. But science itself should never be about blind belief. It should never be dogmatic, because science is a process, and we're constantly having to increase or expand our understanding, and things pop up that hit our current understandings of the way things work. I mean, just more recently, the discussion in cosmology and astrophysics about dark energy in the universe, and dark meaning a placeholder. We don't know what it is, but it's not behaving the way that it was thought to behave. So they have to be doing more research to expand that understanding of things. That's always the important thing here. And hi, Karen. Let's see, Paul, and nothing to it. Try to talk to him. You're talking about the magic skeptic. He puts skeptics articles like Keith Augustine, not Bruce Drayson. It's this speaks to the class we just finished at the Rhine, which is a skeptical approach to parapsychology, co-taught by a true skeptic, although he leans a little bit more towards the disbelieving, but he is willing to look at the evidence. He's always willing. That's Kenny Biddle. And I do recommend his column on the Skeptical Inquirer's website. He's really, he specializes in taking apart equipment, ghost hunting equipment. He's really been very helpful to us in that way as well. But the course really looked at the importance of true skepticism in science and in parapsychology in particular. And in reality, critical thinking is a very important piece of the scientific process. It is important, extremely important, in doing investigations. And being skeptical does not mean disbelief. It means you're looking at the question, or it could mean you don't care. I've met many people who truly are skeptical. They actually don't care one way or the other. That's a skeptical attitude. Asking questions, that's a skeptical attitude. Dismissing things without looking into them is a pseudo-skeptical approach, and it's very dogmatic, and it's based on belief. It's not based on evidence or science, for that matter, at all. Could consciousness be destroyed? You mean outside of the movies? Or the TV show Ghost? That actually happened the other day. They were the last episode of Ghost. there was a character who wanted to destroy the ghosts, kill the ghosts. I have not heard. I guess you could say it's destroyed if there is no life after death. If it's just the brain and the brain dies, and that's all that consciousness is, then I guess it's destroyed. But not that I've ever heard. Not any theories of that. And not any real theories of disintegrating or destroying ghosts who are basically consciousness apparitions. When did scientific skepticism become cynicism? Isn't science supposed to be open to always considering new info? Yes. So the answer is yes. I think that within every field, there is disbelief about other fields. Sometimes it's a scientific hubris. Sometimes it's because people just want to believe that they're right and that somebody else is wrong. Within a field such as physics, you have people who believe in M theory, which was an evolution from string theory, and people who don't. Within psychology, you have significant dissension and a lot of skepticism or cynicism on the different models of the mind and approaches to psychotherapy, for example. So within every field, you have some cynicism or disbelief or bias because people are approaching it from their own perspective and from their own information or basis. But for our field, there have always been cynics. There have always been the people who are disbelievers on the religious side and on the science side. This changed or evolved in the 1970s with the start of this Committee for Scientific Investigations of Claims of the Paranormal. That was the skeptics organization that got started in the mid-1970s, partly as a response to the increase in interest in psychic powers, thanks to the popularity of Uri Geller and others in the mid-70s, and kind of the outgrowth of the what was called the occult explosion in publishing in the late 60s into the 70s. The founders of PsyCop, as it was called, were supposed to, their charter was to be skeptical. One of the founders was Marcello Truzzi, the late Marcello Truzzi, who was a sociologist at Eastern Michigan University and became one of my mentors later on. Marcello, after a year working with PsyCop, quit. And he quit because it was very clear to him that the majority of people on the board of PsyCop and in the group were not skeptical. They were pseudo skeptics. They were cynics. Marcello, in fact, coined that phrase, pseudo skeptic. So he left. He actually aligned himself much more closely with parapsychologists. He had a lot more in common with us, even though he didn't necessarily agree that on the interpretation of the evidence, he was supportive of our field, heavily supportive. In fact, he was supportive of psychic detectives in a different approach. But PsyCop had a lot of very famous people involved and some, big names in various fields. And they kind of put their own beliefs out there, and they went after all of this stuff. The parapsychologists, they went after psychics. They went after not so much ghost hunters, but they went after all the paranormal stuff. They went after cryptozoology. They went after anything that was not mainstream science, pretty much, in a very, very aggressive and often, I would say, disturbing way. Almost as, I'll give you an example. And actually, Kenny Biddle, the skeptic I mentioned before, has still encountered this sometimes. So in 1984, the PsyCop had their conference at Stanford University. I attended. Partly I wanted to attend because one of my professors from Northwestern was speaking there. That professor from my undergraduate was Jalen Hynek, one of the leading experts on UFOs. He had been the civilian advisor to Project Blue Book. And I had even worked with Hynek. I volunteered in the Center for UFO Studies my freshman year in college. So Hynek spoke to this large group, mostly of skeptics, and he was getting giggles when he was talking about some of the reports. And then in the Q&A, he gets asked, how can you study UFOs? And Hynek, who had said this multiple times in his talk, I cannot study UFOs. If we actually had a UFO to study, it would not be unidentified and likely not even flying at that time. I study UFO reports looking for patterns and evidence. Hynek was the one who came up with the stages of close encounters of the first, second, and third kind, by the way. So he answers that question. A couple of minutes later, how can you study UFOs? It was asked multiple times. And then he was on a panel with Paul Kurtz, who was one of the heads of PSYCOP, one of the leaders, who was a UFO guy on the negative side. And it kept coming up. It was as if they just would not listen. Names of parapsychologists mentioned caused giggles and still do. Absolutely absurd. These people were acting like, kindergartners in actuality. So it's a very emotional thing. But PSYCOP had a dramatic effect on academia in the United States. Embarrassing people. They actually actively embarrassed people on faculties, some of their members, and some of their approaches tried to embarrass people to the point where it became toxic for someone on a faculty at any university to mention their interest, talk about their interest, their outside interest in parapsychology or psychic phenomena. And that just simply has dampened things. It's changing now because of the greater interest in consciousness. And of course, our field directly relates to that. But it's been terrible. I mean, it was terrible. I know someone who actually lost his adjunct faculty job at a university in Florida. The letter firing him actually cited his outside interest and activities in parapsychology, which had his wife not been working for the university in a high-paying job, I was trying to convince him to sue because he had physical evidence of wrongful termination right there. He just wouldn't he just wouldn't do it, which is really too bad. So, it is changing, but when I was lecturing at various colleges over the years, I was in the college lecture circuit for probably about 10 or 11 years until the paranormal celebs took over all those gigs. There would often be someone, not usually somebody from the faculty, but a student who was was prompted by a faculty member to challenge me. I have no problem with that. I've faced off against some of these pseudo skeptics many times over the years, so got no problem. Anyway, it has changed. Even the PSYCOP is gone. It's now the Center for Inquiry, and again, they're a lot milder. They don't kind of do the same kind of embarrassing tactics, but some of the folks left over from PSYCOP still do, and refuse to look at evidence. There's still enough of them out there with big names. Okay, let's see. So Paul saying you enjoy watching Ghosts. I'm glad you got hooked on it. That's good. You also should watch the British version of Ghosts as well. Let's see. Seen this from people who are dogmatic Christians and dogmatic skeptics. Yeah, dogmatic pseudo skeptics as well. And the Christian thing that came up a bunch of times, not always in a negative way, but people. Some of the college students, when I was lecturing in the Bible Belt, because I had a lot of colleges in the Bible Belt, would ask, what are your thoughts? What do you believe about demons? And I kind of gave my background in Judaism, no belief in demons whatsoever. Don't believe in the devil. But I also pointed out, but today I'm a Jedi. So, maybe the dark side, but not demons. And usually anytime I said I was a Jedi, and sometimes I go right to that, rather than getting an argument, I'd have the student would nod their heads and just sit down. So it's a great response, by the way, to younger people or people who have seen Star Wars since the beginning, I guess you could say. Paul, you remember PSYCOP and Skeptic Society. Michael Shermer was a little bit, I don't know where he is in this today, but my encounters with him, he's a little bit more on the skeptical side than on the simply dismissive side. So he's a little bit dismissive on stuff, but not in the ways that the PSYCOP people typically were at all. Susanna, your next door neighbor doesn't believe in evolution. There really is nowhere to go from there. Have you met somebody who believes in the flat earth? What can you do about that? You can hit them with all the evidence you want in the world. And even when they're confronted, even if they did an experiment themselves, the odds are they're going to ignore it. So, you just can't, let's just put it this way. If somebody's intense belief is that this stuff doesn't exist and they refuse to look at the evidence, they haven't looked at the evidence, and it's like a why would I situation, it's like change the subject. It's not even worth it. I've mentioned this before. There was a time that I worked when I was away from LexisNexis, that I worked in the library at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, which is a Department of Energy center, research site. They have physics, they have astrophysics, they have a lot of genetics research there going on. And I got into conversation with a number of the physicists, one of whom actually was doing consciousness research. But at one point, one of them said to me as we're talking about this, I'm sorry, parapsychology is not a science. And it occurred to me to ask him a question. So do you consider psychology a science? And he rolls his eyes. He says, absolutely not. It's not a science. So at that point, I thought, okay, if social science is not science, coming from the physical science perspective, I'm not even going to try to convince him that parapsychology is a science, because he's coming from a perspective that just doesn't work. Human beings don't factor into his equation in science. One of my colleagues years ago, we got into a discussion about apparitions and consciousness after death. And he said to me, he could not comprehend how consciousness could exist without the brain. He was coming from a purely materialist perspective in parapsychology. And we have many materialists in parapsychology. So at that point, it's like, well, then I'm not going to be able to convince you. I'm not even going to try to convince you, because you're going to interpret the evidence in a different way. It's not worth that discussion. Tom Schroeder is an example of a true skeptic. He wrote a great book. I'm trying to remember what the book is called. Try to look at my shelf. I think it's Life Before. No, that's not Life Before Life. But Schroeder wrote a really good book on reincarnation a number of years ago. Children Remember Previous Lives. Definitely worth taking a look. He weighs both modern science and that shows memory in the brain and reincarnation evidence. That's good. That's very good. I've actually talked to people who are skeptical about reincarnation, but they've got this big question mark. It's like, how otherwise can these kids possibly have these memories? Some of the pure materialists are still baffled by that. Carl Sagan mentioned that was an important piece of what parapsychology studies for mainstream science to look at, because he was just blown away looking at the evidence and could not conceive of another explanation. So worth looking at that way. Much more fun to talk with psychics, remote mediums, remote viewers. I will tell you that, sadly, I've tried talking to some psychics and mediums who are total true believers or come at things without questioning at all. They are the opposite of the cynics. They are true believers. Whatever they are told, they believe. They follow certain teachers. It doesn't matter what they're told. They believe it without question. There are people out there, and Joe McMoneagle spoke for the Rhine Center on Friday. That video will at some point soon be up on the Rhine Research Center's YouTube channel, because it's part of our Rhine at 90 series. And Joe talked about how so many people claim to be knowing what they're doing with remote viewing, and they don't. There's an awful lot out there who do that, who make up claims, and including those who may have been spent a couple of months in the Stargate program and washed out, but because they were with the Stargate program, they of course know what they're talking about. So it's not everybody who's a psychic medium or remote viewer that is, from my perspective, worth talking to, because I'm going to question them too. Channel is Lori Majka. So, that's the channel that you saw Tom Schroeder on. Okay. Robert Lanza talks about biocentrism. There's a few others who have kind of looked at biocentrism as well that are out there. Was I talking to the Gorilla Skeptic group on Wikipedia going after paranormal? I was not specifically, but there are folks within the Gorilla Skeptics who have done that. Kenny Biddle challenged that a little bit when we had that discussion with John Kruth during our Skeptical Approach course. But there is an absolute definitive bias, a provable bias, maybe not even with the guerrilla skeptics, but definitely with the people running Wikipedia. That's been established for a long time. Charles Tart, the late Charles Tart, who only passed away last month, um, he had done a lot of work. I mean, he's best known in psychology for his work with altered states of consciousness since the 1960s, but he did a lot of work in parapsychology. And when he originally put up his bio, which was accepted, um, it was edited not too long after, and all of his work on parapsychology was eliminated from the bio. And he tried every which way he could. This is even before the guerrilla skeptics existed. He tried it every which way he could to get that put back. And they basically said no. Same with some other people who have actually tried to edit articles. And in fact, Wikipedia has some serious issues to begin with because it is crowdsourced. And some of the editors don't know what they're talking about. And I'm not talking about parapsychology in general. I'm talking about all sorts of topics. I don't recommend anybody go to Wikipedia for anything except maybe information about media like movies and TVs, shows, and things like that. There's some good stuff about that. Paul, you've seen the British version. Yeah, you didn't like it as much. You know, there's some pluses and minuses for the British version. But for those of you who have not seen the British version of Ghosts, the TV show Ghosts, my favorite character is Robin, who is a prehistoric man who's been around for thousands of years. He's very, very funny, just his approach. So the other thing that's great about the British version is that most of the actors are the writers and the creators of the show, and they were all in an improv group. So and then they play multiple roles sometimes too. So non-ghostly roles. So it's a kind of a fun show from that perspective. You saw the movie Men Who Stare at Goats, seen the documentary Third Eye Spies. Well, The Men Who Stare at Goats was a comedy, of course, takeoff on the book, The Men Who Stare at Goats, which was not exactly what happened in that group, the Earth's First Battalion, that group that was in the Army that had nothing to do with the Stargate program, and it was not a funded program. So let's put that out of the way right off the bat. Nothing to do with remote viewing specifically. They were guys in the Army who wanted to become real Jedi. And they worked with, among others, a martial artist named Guy Savelli. And, you know, supposedly in the movie and the book, they would intentionally put their thoughts and kill goats, you know, use psychokinesis to knock over a goat. That's not what happened. According to Guy Savelli, because I was in touch with him, especially in the 1980s, while this was all going on, they had requested that he teach them the dim mak, which is a legendary martial arts kung fu technique to use chi to touch someone, and then what happens is the energy from your chi gets put into the person or object, and then disrupts the organs or whatever's there. So Guy actually had sent me photos of one of the goats that they had done this with, actually a couple of them, and the autopsy, basically the cut open goat, and the organs were disrupted. They were blown apart. Not something I kept because it was kind of disgusting. When the movie came out, based on what Guy had told me, I thought, well, it really probably should have called The Men Who Touched the Goats, but that would be the porn version, I think, if you think about it. So they really couldn't do it the way, you know, John Ronson couldn't have reported exactly the same way. That would have been even more unbelievable. I actually have video from that Guy sent me. It's not the greatest quality video, but he taught a group of Army Rangers some of these techniques, a protective shielding technique, so they could take blows and have the energy of the blow kind of diffused. And then also the dim mak. And they demonstrated it on a watermelon and an orange and a couple of other things. And really pretty interesting. Slapping a watermelon and then cutting it open and seeing it like completely pulped inside. Very interesting. Anyway, I have not seen the Third Eye Spies documentary. You know, Russell Targ did a lot of work with remote viewing, of course, but he's not the full story because he left the program very early on, comparatively. He did work with remote viewing in other ways in the 1980s with Keith Harari and a couple of other folks. But the Third Eye Spies is not the full story. In fact, there's a book called Phenomenon by Anne. I can't remember her name. Somebody supposedly about the Stargate program, the history of the Stargate program. And there's a slight problem with the book. They left people out. There's a brief mention of Edwin C. May in the book, but Ed May was the program director from late 1985 till this program closed in 1995. How do you do a history of a program and not talk about the research done, which continues, by the way, outside the government side, the guy who ran the program? There's some other things that are really problematic in the book as well. So anyway, he was not even interviewed for the book. And I know that he's not happy about his interview for Third Eye Spies. Let's see. Jody, your southern aunt said arguing with certain people is like wrestling a pig. You just get dirty and the pig enjoys it. That is absolutely true. Yeah, absolutely true. You know, a variation, why shouldn't you teach a pig to read? It wastes your time and annoys the pig. I was taught growing up, I was around enough news people for NBC that when I started doing interviews, being interviewed, and also in some respects, actually, I did a couple of lectures in the early 80s to the Bay Area skeptics. And talking to these news people who often interviewed people really helped me a lot. Because one of the things that, I don't know, it was Roy Neal or Edwin Newman who taught me this, is to not rise to the bait of a baiting question or, you know, a personal attack. Instead, act hurt or have no reaction. And that works really well. It really works so well with the skeptics that when I was attacked in my first lecture for the Bay Area Skeptics, which is held at John F. Kennedy University, I mean, it was basically the speaker coordinator who had booked me on the request of one of the other folks at the Skeptics had, first of all, he and one other guy were asking me the exact same question multiple times. And again, I didn't rise to I just answered the question. I didn't say, you asked me this before. Are you stupid? I didn't do any of that. At one point, after them asking me the same question 5 times, and I've answered the question 5 times, in very simple terms, one of the main people for the Bay Area Skeptics told them to shut up because either they don't understand English or something like that, or you're trying to annoy the speaker, which we do not support. And then this one guy at the end gets up to thank me. He says, "Thank you, Lloyd, for, presenting to us and kind of shining us on." Basically, he made a comment like I was bullshitting them. At which point, the head of the Bay Area Skeptics got up and told him to sit down and shut up, apologized to me. I just went, I didn't rise to that bait either. I didn't get defensive. The guy actually was thrown out of the organization. So always remember, don't rise to the bait of a personal attack. Just calmly point out and say, that's a personal attack. I don't know what that has to do with anything. Certainly has nothing to do with the research at all. So important there. Third Eye Spies is in fact on Amazon Prime. That's right. Repeat the upcoming schedule. Yes. So my courses coming up in May are the Science of ESP, an 8-week session looking at the research, the kinds of research that have been done, but going back actually in time to even before laboratory research, talking about spontaneous experiences of ESP, and then talking about practical applications of ESP and the findings from the research and how that kind of connects to our daily lives. That's an 8-week class. I'm teaching another course called The Development of Investigative Techniques, looking at the evolution of investigations of apparitions, hauntings, poltergeists, ESP, psychokinesis outside the laboratory, starting with the first recorded ghost hunt, which was by Artemidorus over 2,000 years ago in ancient Greece, and going till today's methods. So I will be critical of the methodologies that are used, if you want to call them that, on some of the TV shows. But we'll talk about those methods and, of course, the research, the way we actually have played with investigative techniques in about apparitions, hauntings, poltergeists, reincarnation cases, and other types of things as well. That's a 4-week class. There's a course on music and psi being taught. That's a 4-week class in May. There's a course, I'm not teaching that one. There is a course on remote viewing being taught by Paul Smith, if you want to learn something about remote viewing. And then there's another course, an 8-week course, which is an introduction to the field of parapsychology, taught by Jimmy Aiken. And it's a really good course. So if you've not taken any of that, those are all at www.rhineedu.org. Those are listed right now. I put that in there. So feel free to take a look at them. Tina, feigning hurt is okay, but best not to express hurt if the offender is emotionally immature and pathological. I would agree with that. When you're in a TV situation or in a lecture situation, that was one of the few times I actually feigned being hurt. I was attacked other times on some TV shows, and I just responded calmly. Think about being Mr. Spock. Be a Vulcan. Raise an eyebrow. It's like, what happens if it does cause the other people sometimes to get angry, to kind of go off the handle, which if you're in a situation where it's being monitored by television, for example, or radio for that matter, or a podcast, if you're on a podcast, you can always kind of drop off. Or even a lecture situation, your non-reaction to it actually brings the audience on your side, especially if the person starts flying off the handle. I saw that happen actually with my late friend Bob Steiner, who was the head of the Bay Area Skeptics at one point. He was a magician, friend of mine. In fact, he and I kind of connected because of magic. And for a while, he was my accountant also. Bob and I got along really well. He was also originally from New York. We had a lot of background similarities. And the thing about Bob was we would be asked, we're at a party and there were skeptics there and other people there. And it's like, Lloyd and Bob, how can you be friends? You don't agree on this. It's like, yeah, exactly. We respect each other's, opinions, even though the other person's wrong. And we would both say exactly the same thing. And then we'd laugh about it. But Bob was in a little debate with Jeffrey Mishlove, in fact, for our group that we had originally in Berkeley, the California Society for Psychical Study. And Bob tended to be a real debater, and he got into it heavily. Jeff stayed a little bit calmer. And at one point, Bob was getting very excited about something, and Jeffrey just reached over and touched Bob's shoulders and said, Bob, you don't have to get that excited or emotional about it. And Bob freaked out because Jeff touched him. So I did have a little talk with Bob after that. It didn't endear Bob to the group. Let's put it that way. So keep if you were ever speaking to a group and somebody is attacking you or asking questions, you can get aggressive. A number of years ago, it was 2018 or 2019. I don't remember what year it was that, thanks to a friend of mine, I was invited along, and I brought Ed May with me, and I brought another parapsychologist, Pamela Heath, with me because she had a background in sci-fi. But we spoke at the World Science Fiction Convention when it was held in San Jose. We had a session on parapsychology, and people got to ask, Ed and myself and Pam talked about our backgrounds, and basically Ed talked about the remote viewing program, about Stargate. We talked about some other stuff as well. And at one point, and we had some great questions. In fact, we had standing room only in this talk. We were worried because we were scheduled opposite dinner time and 3 other speakers. We were in a room that held 100 chairs. We had standing room only. It was actually really great for us. And somebody said, well, what about the $1 million challenge? He got very, very nasty about the way he was presenting it. That was the challenge that James Randi had. And I would say that I got energetic about that and kind of put him in his place. because the challenge had already been canceled 3 years before. And I just flat out, asked them things like, if somebody won the challenge, would you change your opinion? It's like, that makes no sense at all. Okay. Susanna, what does skeptics say about the flurry of, they just say that they're coincidences and that you've put meaning to them. Coincidence technically is two events that happen at the same time that somebody connects in a meaningful way. And the synchronicity is more meaningful to the individual. Yeah, they still put it as chance. That's what they say. Let's see here. Susanna, I was a police dispatcher at Berkeley. I was being trained, and suddenly I saw the word peacock in my head. It scurs a day. The next day, my trainer said was scars, marks, and tattoos. My cousin has a tattoo of peacock on his arm. Yeah, we run into really interesting things, and sometimes what's a synchronicity may just be that your own unconscious is using its psychic ability to bring something to your attention or to pop up with something that connects to something that's about to happen. Synchronicities may be an indicator of some very subtle precognitive ability that we often have that puts us in the right place at the right time, or has us address certain things or kind of pay attention to certain things. And, otherwise they just happen to be happening. All right. We have about 2 minutes left. I will be back with a much fancier look and feel, of course, in 2 weeks when my producer is back with me. I hope you have enjoyed this. I do have to show off my cool new shirt. This is the Rocky and Bullwinkle horror show. Happen to find a really good vendor of some really fun shirts, and I'm a big Rocky and Bullwinkle fan. I really love the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So I'll have a other fun one in a couple of weeks as well. So anyway, lips. What does that mean? Oh, okay. I got you. That's the beginning, the singing of the song. I assume that's what you're talking about, Tina. Yeah, there's no lips. Just some of the Rocky, kind of the Bullwinkle as Rocky, and Rocky the character, and from the movie, and just some other stuff. So Boris and Natasha on here. And I thought it was kind of odd that as Columbia, the character Columbia, right there, it's Nell from Dudley Do-Right, who has nothing to do with the Rocky and Bullwinkle stories. That's pretty bizarre. Okay, the schedule 2 weeks, it's going to be April 27th in 2 weeks. And then it'll be 2 weeks after that, and then we will take a break. It'll be 3 weeks between at that point. So I think the one after that will be the first Sunday in June, since I'll be out of town the following week, and that kind of puts things in line for the rest of the year, or for the most part for the rest of the year. Okay, so again, one in May, one in 2 weeks, one in May, and I'd like to thank you all for coming, and wish you all a happy couple of weeks. Happy springtime. Happy Passover if you celebrate that. Happy Easter if you celebrate that. Happy any other holiday if you celebrate any other holiday in between. And everybody take care. And I'll see you again. Bye-bye.